Story 1. What kind of person would have a sword? What are you going to do? Imagine someone breaking into your home and finally being able to use it. Anyway, I own two. One is a samurai sword I bought off Amazon because I was 16 at the time. The other is a Zelda sword that I believe was for a Halloween costume, but in reality, I had wanted it for 2 years prior. Story 2. I had a wooden sword that I made as a 5-year-old with my grandfather when he taught me some basic woodworking. I looked for it last month but could not find it. Story 3. I'm a longsword fencer, so it is hard not to have a sword in my home. Where else am I supposed to put it? Story 4. I have 13 blades. My hobby is bladesmithing, so that is understandable. Most are single-edged falchion-style blades with a few different guards and handle materials. I also have an arming sword I made, a katana-inspired modern sword, a sword version of a Bowie knife, and even a Sinkidia with imperfect fullers due to a mistake I made during grinding. Story 5. I make props professionally, so here are some of my creations. Master Sword from Legend of Zelda. Way to the Dawn from Kingdom Hearts 2. Ultima from Kingdom Hearts 3. Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII Remake. Pit Swords and Bow from Kid Icarus. Monadu from Xenoblade. Monadu Rex from Xenoblade 2. Invictus from Final Fantasy XVI. Virtuous Treaty from Nier Automata. Chare's Sword, 3 versions. Magician's Judge from Critical Role. Holy Avenger from Dungeons & Dragons. Riven's Sword from League of Legends. Kensuk from Dungeon Meshi. Lucifer's Keyblade from Hazbin Hotel. Levin's Sword from Fire Emblem. Stygian Blade from Hades. And a variety of other weapons that are not swords. Story 6. I have a replica of Sting from The Lord of the Rings, a large sword with a basket hilt that I won in a raffle when I was young. It is real but looks ceremonial rather than functional. I also have an authentic sword bayonet from an 1891 German rifle. Story 7. Katana, Turkish scimitar, Bakken. Honestly, though a machete is technically not a sword, I would probably reach for the machete first. Story 8. I have a couple of katana swords and an old Spanish sword with some Spanish writing on the blade. It has a curved blade, and I believe it is a cutlass-style blade, but I am not completely sure. Story 9. I have a sword in my bedroom. I met a man in Scotland, and after several discussions, he learned that I was a descendant of Sir Colin Campbell. He told me that if I could send him a list of my important family male members proving who I was, he would send me a free sword. I know what you are thinking. I did not send him any information on living relatives. He sent me a beautiful dragon-etched sword. I have had it for 6 years now. Story 10. Woman here have to answer this one. Several katanas, a couple of bakkens, a custom-made hand and a half-sword and X made for my 16th birthday, several rubber practice foils, epes, sabers, several actual fencing weapons, and a dancing sword. Might be more. Also have a suit of custom armor and fencing gear. Why yes, former hard suit fighter here. Why do you ask? Story 11. Rapier, fader, and messer for sparring. Blunt longsword for solo practice. And a poor quality fantasy Renaissance fair sword I bought when I was 10. Longsword, arming sword, and montanti, all for sparring, are ordered and will arrive over the next year. Story 12. Jesus Christ. How many men own swords? Apparently all, except for the one man with the meat sword. Story 13. I don't, because I prefer axes. I have a fully functional Viking bearded axe replica. I used to do some historical reenactment back in the day. Story 14. My prized ones are a pair of actual American Civil War cavalry sabers from my grandfather. I also have a 5'2" lance-necked flamberge that is pretty good. The rest are fire-dancing machetes, a cup-hilt rapier for the same purpose, and other decorative or prop swords. I have a nice small sword sized for when my daughter gets a bit older. It will be a good fit for an 8-year-old. Story 15. My roommate has a World War II-era katana that was handed down to him. It is hanging on our living room wall. Story 16. I have an inexpensive one from Amazon. When I was buying something, it was cheaper to increase the total price to qualify for free shipping than to just pay the shipping cost. Story 17. I have a sword in my car on the driver's side and 2 axes and hatchets for the home, plus a good old 9mm firearm for good measure. Story 18. I have a Viking sword, shield, and axe. I like the way they look. They are beautiful and interesting objects. If it ever came to home defense, I would rely on the bear spray. Story 19. I have the bastard sword and wakizashi short swords from Badger Blades as well as the Dao from Condor. If you count machetes as a type of sword, I have several cold steel models, Gladius, Sikh's, Chopper, and the large kukri, as well as the K-bar kukri and cutlass. I started a blade collection as a teen, which is mostly medium and large folding knives, fixed blades of various sizes that outnumber my smaller folders, a variety of machetes and hatchets or axes, and a few swords. The most expensive was probably the Badger Blades Wakizashi at around $450, followed by a tie between the bastard sword and the folding Benchmade full-size Griptilian with added titanium handle scales from Flightanium at around $350. The bastard sword was bought at the Renaissance Fair 20 years ago. It is closer to $500 now. Story 20. I am Sikh, and my religion requires carrying a sword for the protection of the weak and oppressed. Besides carrying a 6-inch kirpan on my body at all times, I also have the following at home. 1. An 8-inch katar, a push dagger from India. A 30-inch curved tulwar, an Indian sword. Tabar axe, a Sikh battle axe. A few chakras, steel quoits worn on the turban to protect against head strikes and used defensively by throwing at the enemy. A 40-centimeter dal shield. Story 21. Full-sized heron-marked sword. An official Wheel of Time blade from around 20 years ago. It is unsharpened, however. Story 22. Prussian sword pre-World War I. It is visually appealing and includes a scabbard. It was obtained from an auction. I have no use for it. Story 23. I live in Mexico most of the year, so I cannot have firearms there like I do at my house in Arizona. Therefore, I keep a cold steel gladius and a machete handy. Story 24. I have 4 swords, I believe. A wooden practice sword from when I was a kid involved in karate. A ceremonial Knights of Columbus sword from my grandfather. A champagne saber. Sting. Story 25. I have a Samurai 3000 that I bought in 2000. It is no longer displayed proudly, but my 14-year-old self's first purchase from the internet cannot be thrown out or sold. Story 26. I have an ancient Cossack sword and a few daggers that all belong to my great-grandfather, the former Prince of Georgia. It is a single-handed sword designed to be used while riding horseback. It is very light but very strong. You could literally feel a head getting sliced right off with one swing. Story 27. I cannot be your Aragorn, but I can be Legolas or Gimli, or a modern country redneck with various assault rifle platforms and shotguns. Story 28. I have an old World War I style bayonet from my parents' attic. It is not sharp or for home defense. I just think it is neat. Story 29. I have a blackout Naga machete sword. It has a 22-inch blade with a squared tip. It is not ideal for stabbing, but it can cut through a 2 3/8-inch walnut dowel with a single swing. Story 30. I have a pair of swords that my aunt sent to my grandfather from Thailand when she worked there during the Vietnam War. Story 31. I used to have a sword, a machete, and a giant baseball bat. Sadly, I took a hit to my knee and could no longer use them. Story 32. I have one katana from my edgy teenage days that sits in a closet somewhere and a historical European martial arts nylon-bladed sparring longsword in a different closet. I am not in a place with historical European martial arts clubs around at the moment. Story 33. I have a black wooden sword that weighs around 1.2 kilograms, which I used to swing when I was younger. I lost it, though. Sad. Story 34. I keep a machete on the driver's side of my truck for emergencies. It is an invaluable tool for the outdoor activities we enjoy. Comes in handy more often than you might think. Splitting logs as a fire poker, shovel, sand stake, snow stake, and spatula. I also have a home defense axe. Story 35. It's about 20 right now. I got into forging about 8 years ago. They are sold during the 4th of July Folk Festival. I will likely have 5 more and 30 knives by the time the 4th of July rolls around. Story 36. 2 plastic swords and a wooden short sword. All belong to my 4-year-old daughter. There is also an unspecified number of Lego swords, if those count. Story 37. Khyber sword from Afghan National Army. I also have a Gallic machete from Duluth that is a serious hallway chopper. I keep that one next to my bed in case of problems. Story 38. I have a gladius I made for Latin class with my dad back in high school, made of metal and wood, which was the only reason I passed. I also have a number of cosplay swords I have made. Story 39. I have a bayonet sword and a very old antique hunting sword that belonged to my grandfather. I also have many knives because I am a knife maker. Story 40. Fuzzy, shrill, amusing carpenter sips. One head flies, falls wild. Story 41. 35-inch Brazilian Army jungle machete. Not strictly a sword, but in the West Indies, anything longer than your average kitchen knife is considered a sword. Story 42. My dad has a katana that my great-grandfather took from a Japanese officer he killed during World War II. It is very cool, and I can't wait for it to be mine. Story 43. I have a wooden Rengoku replica sword and hope to get some real ones when I have money to spend. Story 44. I have a replica Roman gladius that is real steel. I have training weapons. A long sword, short sword, dagger, and katana. They are fun to hold and swing around and are inexpensive on Amazon. Story 45. I have 6 items. A set of katanas. Katana, tanto, wakizashi. A set of prop katanas. Katana, wakizashi. A 12th century medieval sword. Story 46. I have several. I inherited them from my father. The most interesting are 2 Civil War swords that have been in the family for generations. Story 47. Only wooden ones, but I want to get a foil as I fence in college, and I would love a medieval Scottish longsword. My son wants a katana, and my daughter wants one of every sword. Story 48. I have a katana, a wakizashi, and a tanto that my aunt gave me when my uncle passed away. No idea why they were in his house, of course. Story 49. I have a bastard sword, a katana, a wakizashi, a walking stick hidden dual sword, and a parrying dagger, as well as a dozen other knives, a double-blade throwing axe, and throwing knives. Story 50. It was my grandfather's, but I do not remember where it is in my house. It is gigantic, I think a great sword or claymore. The hilt has Christian crosses on either side, and the sheath is leather with a strap. It is extremely old and would be useless in a fight in its current condition. I do not know where he got it, and I barely remember how it came into my possession. My grandfather was in World War I and World War II and was an alcoholic. Other than that, I know nothing about him. Story 51. I have one in my daughter's old bedroom from when she was on a King Arthur kick in high school years ago. I think the kind would be an English broadsword, but it has a highly decorative hilt and pommel. I do not know any brand. It was just a phase she went through. It came from a trader's mall and was made in China. Story 52. Aido practitioner and former medieval reenactor with a few katanas, a couple of iedos, bakans, blunted long swords, daggers, rapiers, and some sparring-grade lightsabers. Story 53. My wife and I both have swords. We met and married while serving in the United States Marine Corps. When I was promoted to corporal, my brother and cousins pitched in and got me a non-commissioned officer sword. The Marine Corps is a family tradition. When my wife was promoted to corporal, my brother and I got her one. Story 54. It is a bayonet affectionately referred to as a sword bayonet. Pattern 1907 bayonet. The blade alone is 17 inches. Story 55. Minecraft diamond sword made of foam. Chinese executioner sword. It looks very unique for a sword, single-sided like a machete. Story 56. I have one, and my roommates do too. They are more like props for us because we are theater people. Mine was made in Pakistan, and I do not know what type it is. Story 57. Endurel, a rapier, a short sword, a wooden decorative sword, and the dagger I got my wife for our first Christmas together. And Jurol was also a gift to her for this Christmas, and she was the one who took the initiative to get the others. She likes swords, Dungeons and Dragons, tan and green decorative themes, and reading fantasy. Honestly, I don't know what I did to deserve her, but I hope I never stop. Story 58. When I was about 15 years old, my mother took me to a blade exposition. We saw a basket-hilted broadsword on display for $100, and my mother said, "If you don't get it now, you will never find a finer sword at that price." So I got it. The sword is one-handed, and the basket hilt makes it very heavy to use, but it is well-balanced and battle-ready. Story 59. Got about 6 swords and 2 bayonets, a razor-sharp cold steel machete, 3 hatchets, a double-headed throwing hatchet, and a razor-sharp Kershaw Camp 10. The swords are mostly knockoffs and just wall hangers. I have at least 12 to 14 pocket knives. There is one sword I really want and have wanted since Star Trek: The Next Generation Season 4, Episode 7, Reunion. The Klingon Batleth, which aired on November 5, 1990. Story 60. Oh, I used to. The first sword I had when I was a kid was kind of like a Spanish rapier sword that I got from Las Vegas. Then I got a set of cheap katanas from a friend's uncle. After that, I bought a replica of Sting from Lord of the Rings. Through purchases and gifts, I accumulated a bunch of military bayonets and a Bowie knife. My most cherished bayonet was an antique from the turn of the century, but it was stolen. All my other bayonets and bladed items were given to a friend since my wife did not want them in the house. So yes, I used to. Story 61. 1 inexpensive Highlander katana, 1 Prussian cavalry saber, 1 replica bastard sword, low quality but still better than the Highlander sword, and a turn-of-the-century small sword. Story 62. I have several swords. A claymore, a few long swords, katanas, an odachi, a cavalry saber, a rapier, Chinese hook swords, and several longer knives. Story 63. Had one before moving, well, several. Replica Sephiroth katana, replica gunblade, Squall's revolver and Lionheart, and black twin machetes. Story 64. I have several weapons. 2 katanas, a saber, and a ninjutsu. For good measure, I also have a Morning Star. 1 katana is a homemade abomination my dad brought back from Vietnam. Story 65. For the longest time, we had a machete in my household. I think it ended up being left behind at an apartment. Story 66. For the moment, I have 2 lightsabers, but I am getting married soon and I put a sword on our registry. Here is hoping there is at least one cool person among the people I have invited. Story 67. I do. Hanging on my wall. It's an authentic battle-ready medieval sword. I oil it as needed. If I had to categorize it, I would say it is a bastard sword. Can be wielded with 1 hand or 2. Story 68. I have several swords. 1 is a gladius that I received as a military award when I belonged to a unit called the Centurions. Another is a scimitar that I use for Renaissance fairs. 2 are training swords my ex left when she moved out. She was into martial arts. She also left me a lot of bow staves. 1 sword is somewhere between a long sword and a 2-handed sword. It is sharp but made of poor quality steel, and I keep it because it looks cool. I also have a set consisting of a katana, wakizashi, and tanto that a friend gave me when she packed up her life and left on short notice. Story 69. Do mini swords for display count? If yes, I have probably over 100 now. They are 22 to 30 centimeters long swords for desktop displays. Story 70. I have a Chinese sword tucked next to my bed. I bought it because I like swords, but I keep it in case of a break-in. Story 71. I have a couple of 18th century rapiers and a 19th century Mexican cavalry saber. My grandfather collected all kinds of items and gave these to me when I was a teenager. Story 72. I have a patterned 1796 heavy cavalry sword carried at the Battle of Waterloo. It is modified to a spear point, giving it an edge on the top for backslashing. It is a brutal weapon, a butcher's weapon. Story 73. One of my best friends growing up bought me a katana from a pawn shop for Christmas when I was about 18. I do not know why he did that, but it was pretty funny and we had fun messing around doing dangerous things with it. 3 years later, a really dumb and incompetent but nice guy I worked with majorly messed up, but I covered for him and helped him fix it. The next day, he came to work and gave me a blunted arming sword he bought online. That was kind of weird but cool. Around when I turned 27, I got into blacksmithing, and I have been doing that for about 3 years now. I have made a Lord of the Rings-inspired elvish falchion that I think turned out pretty good. A small cutlass that I am still working on the guard of and think is coming along well, and I am working on a longsword that has been very frustrating. I have got the general shape down, but it is not straight at all, the edge is very wavy, and it has a couple of deep, missed hammer strikes. So I guess I have 4.5. Story 74. The biggest and most impressive one I have is a 52-inch broadsword. I have named it Kindness. Story 75. I have a hand and a half-bastard sword that my father gave me, and a one-handed arming sword that I bought at a Renaissance fair. I also own a dagger, for which I bought a matching one for my wife, as well as a pair of twin daggers with screws in the hilts so you can turn them into one double-bladed dagger. Story 76. I have a cane sword because I need a cane and it is cool to have a sword. However, everywhere I go, people ask me if it is a cane sword, and it is annoying. Story 77. An arming sword, a decorative yet functional katana, 2 gladii, a trio of sabers, a chikudo, and a broken sword. Story 78. I used to have 2. The first is an Angus trim at 1215 worked over by Christian Fletcher. I still have this one. The second was an Albion Gadjalt, which was so nice I never wanted to actually use it for cutting or anything else. I guess it is like owning a really nice collector car that is too nice to even drive. I sold this one. I kind of miss it, but not really. Story 79. I left a sword in my room when I moved out. It might still be there if my family did not move it. It looks cool, but now that I am living in Japan, I am under constant ninja attacks, and my sword was left 12 time zones away. Story 80. 1 Viking Age replica and an Indian saber of unknown type inherited. Sleeping next to a large hunting knife because I like to imagine myself using it in case of intruders. Story 81. No swords yet, sadly, but I have a dagger from Windlass. I got it for Christmas a couple of years ago. I want to own a proper medieval sword and a pirate-style cutlass someday. My local Tractor Supply also has a decent-sized section for knives and related items. One of the brands there sells spears and axes that I would love to buy. Story 82. I have a Toledo sword from when I visited Spain as an exchange student. I also have a machete I bought for yard work but never use it for that purpose. Story 83. 20 years as an actor and in reenactment, including medieval markets and Renaissance fairs. A Beidenhander, a one-handed sword and a dagger, a shashka, Hungarian saber, and a rapier, all suitable for stage combat. A 200-year-old katana, a wakizashi replica, and 2 short swords from the Dominican Republic. Additionally, a custom lightsaber as a collectible. Story 84. I have about 5 plastic ones. They are all my 4-year-old sons. I would love a katana. I do have a couple of impressive axes and hatchets. One is a Viking replica. Story 85. Who in the world has a sword in their home, commoners? I have a morning star like all proper gentlemen and maybe a couple of katanas in the shed. Story 86. I own 5 historical swords and sabers that are various centuries old. One is probably ancient, dating back to the late Roman Empire, and it was used as a practice sword by young learners. They all came from my father, who was a collector. I do not know their exact value, but I presume it is very high. Story 87. I have 2 sword bayonets for my Arasaka. One is a late war original and the other is an early war reproduction. Story 88. Since my boyfriend does not have any swords, I will answer on behalf of both of us since we hope to live together soon. A 2-handed sword and a dagger. Hopefully there will be more to come. Story 89. I have a wooden bakken and a bamboo shurnai. I used to practice kendo, Japanese fencing where you shout a lot and strike each other on the head with sticks, back when I was in university. No metal swords, though. Story 90. I was really into swords when I was a teenager. I nearly took my own eye out thinking I was the Highlander. I tried to get rid of them when I grew up a bit, but found it was very difficult to sell them anywhere. They now exist in my garage somewhere. Story 91. There was a news item years ago about a man killing a robber during a breaking and entering at his home with a samurai sword. I say whatever gets the job done. But a sword is more impressive than a gun in my opinion. Story 92. My officer's ceremonial sword is worn with number 2 dress and other ceremonial attire. It is a Royal Artillery sword made by Wilkinson Sword. A beautiful piece of equipment. It is kept in my umbrella stand with the blackthorn sticks and umbrellas. Story 93. I own a replica of a gladius. My grandfather was a goldsmith and wanted to try forging a blade. It was his gift for my 13th birthday. It is mostly a decorative piece now, but it has a very sharp blade, which I sometimes use to cut meat. Story 94. My wife bought me a limited edition numbered version of Sting when the Lord of the Rings movies came out. It hangs in the wooden display case on the wall in my audiovisual room. It is honestly pretty cool. Story 95. I have a claymore and, across the room on the opposing wall, a battle axe. Between the two, I have a very understanding wife. After much contemplation, my choice in case of home invasion would be the axe because of its advantage in maneuverability in tight quarters. Also, the headlines would be cooler. Story 96. I bought an inexpensive replica of Sting from Rotorua in New Zealand. It was surprisingly easy to transport a sword through an airport when it was in your checked luggage. Story 97. I have 2 real samurai swords. I used to run a samurai sword experience business in Kyoto. My brother gave me a falchion for my birthday. Story 98. I have a sword disguised as a keyblade from the game Kingdom Hearts. It looks like an oversized child's toy to those who do not know. I absolutely love it. Story 99. I have a messer and a ninjato that were gifted to me by a relative after his brother died. Both were handmade by the man who died. They are of less than stellar quality, but the messer is solid for use. I am looking into getting a European small sword for fencing, but finances are quite tight. Story 100. I have a few machetes, a Legend of Zelda sword usually known as the Master Sword, a Chinese broadsword, a scimitar, a Chris sword with a wavy blade that I thought looked cool, a scythe, and 3 kukris. The machetes and scythe get the most use with yard work. The rest live on various shelves. Story 101. No, the closest I have is a machete I use for chopping suckers off trees and a giant slicing knife I use for brisket and ham that I call my meat sword. Story 102. One is Ichigo's first Bankai sword, a black 6-foot-long katana or odachi, from the anime Bleach. I got it when I was 20 or 21 while living in Florida. It was my first real full-time job, and I was in a bad place mentally. It was purely retail therapy and impulse buy. When I moved back home to New York, I kept it on the front seat of my Ford Explorer. At a rest area where I stopped, I came out to find a couple of guys walking around my truck, eyeing my things. I walked over and repositioned the sword as if it was falling into the driver's seat. They asked if it was real. I said, yes, and it has a black blade too. I showed them, acting excited to talk about it. They walked away. It wasn't nighttime, and I was the only other person there besides them. My other sword is a simple katana my sister bought me for Christmas after I moved home. There is nothing intrinsically special about it, but it was the first time my sister got me something herself for Christmas. I have both swords mounted on the wall. Since it was mentioned, I also have 3 lightsabers. One is nothing special, just the saber you create through the Disney Build-A-Lightsaber experience. It was fun. The other 2 are Ahsoka's first dual lightsabers from the Legacy Collection, which I hope to mount on the wall soon. Story 103. I have a sword from a flatmate who left 15 years ago along with some other items, mainly books. He said he would be back for it, but I never saw him again. I looked it up just now, and I think it is this type of sword. The Skiboast, a Scottish knight's sword from the 11th century. Story 104. I have a katana and a rapier because I am a nerd. I still have 2 of my fencing swords because I was a sporty dork in high school. Story 105. Broad-bladed knightly sword, made by a blacksmith for reenactors. Not sharpened, but otherwise functional. My daughter has her eyes on it. Story 106. I have a collection of swords including a claymore, a 19th century replica of a 17th century sword, Scots broadsword, 18th century, with Andrea Ferrara running wolf blade, 1760 British dragoon saber, United States Civil War cavalry saber, 1830 Scots broadsword, Scottish dirk, 1845 pattern British infantry officer's sword, 1831 pattern British general officer's sword, 19th century katana with World War II hilt and fittings, late 19th century pattern British cavalry saber, British officer's dress sword, replica claymore, replica Gallic Vercingetorix bastard sword, and a couple of fencing weapons as well. Story 107. I have 3 swords. One of them is a replica of Glamdring, Gandalf's sword from The Lord of the Rings. The second is a Xiphos, a type of hoplite sword. The third is a longer sword that is a version of a sword from Zombie Tools. Story 108. A fencing sword, but it is only here temporarily. It is a gift for my father who used to do fencing when he was in college. Story 109. I have 2 foam cosplay prop swords with fiberglass cores, modeled after Corrido's swords from Sword Art Online. I like sword fighting my nieces and nephews with them. We have also used them on piñatas. They were $20 each. I do not mind if they get a little dinged up. I have had them for years. Story 110. I have a replica of the Tizona, the legendary medieval sword wielded by El Cid Campeador. It is forged in steel and is not sharp, but I think it is very neat. Story 111. I used to teach traditional weapons at a martial arts school, so I have a large box of various traditional weapons in my shed. There is probably a katana-style sword in there somewhere. Story 112. Ultralight Tai Chi Jin, also known as Tai Chi sword, named Namatu, is a sword I customized with my own wrap and counterweight. I also had a blacksmith reprofile the blade to move the balance further back. It holds a place of distinction in our living room. Story 113. I changed countries and left a lot of belongings at my parents' house. Flaming Chris with a matching dagger. Story 114. I have a cutlass. I have a pirate costume that I wear for festivals, so it is mainly for that. It is also fully functional, which makes it doubly cool. Story 115. I have one from Nier. It is not sharp and is about 72 inches, so it would be nearly worthless in a break-in, but it looks cool, and that is what matters. Story 116. Wooden fantasy sword I made in the last 15 minutes of Year 12 woodwork class. My friend said it looks similar to Cloud's Buster sword. I have never watched that particular anime, so I am not sure if I have that right. Story 117. It's a ninja tool that someone sold me out of their trunk. It is in poor condition because the blade is slightly warped, and there is a small part with some corrosion. It is in the same cardboard box I received it in, and I have not looked at it in many years. Story 118. I have a German officer's dress uniform sword that my grandfather brought home from World War II. He actually brought 2. My brother has the other. Story 119. I have a World War I era British sword handed down to me from my grandfather, who got it from his father, who bought it at an auction. It is the family sword. It is mounted above my bed. Story 120. I have a Civil War era bayonet that people usually mistake for a sword. Kind of looks like one, but it is a 3-sided T-shape with a point. Story 121. I have a master sword hanging on the wall of my gaming room. It was made for me as a gift by a friend who is a blacksmith. He made it as game accurate as possible. The coloring is not perfect, but the design and craftsmanship are spot on. He even hired a leather worker to wrap the hilt and craft the scabbard. Story 122. I went through that phase. I have 2 inexpensive imitation katanas, one like a traditional design and one with a dragon on the hilt. They are now mostly gathering dust. Story 123. I have a pirate sword. I bought it for a Halloween costume. Turned out to be metal and sharp. I use it as a prop when I go to the Renaissance Festival now. Story 124. 2 katanas and a tanto, which are just decorative, and I have a gladius I bought almost 20 years ago from a blacksmith at a Renaissance fair. Story 125. A World War I German artillery saber. Also, a few sword-like objects I would not trust to cut a watermelon. Story 126. One cane sword and one umbrella sword. These are real swords but made for novelty. The canes are aluminum and have a German warhammer as the handle. Story 127. I went to medieval times as an 8th grader, and my mother bought me a sword since everyone else was getting one. I do not remember what kind it was, but it is pretty cool. I have it hanging on my wall in my bedroom. Story 128. I have a functional bastard sword hanging on my wall in its sheath. I carry it on hikes sometimes and at the Renaissance Fair. If you want your children to be like me, get them involved in fencing by their early teens. Story 129. I have a katana and a saber that my son got me the last 2 Christmases. That guy loves blades. I guess I do too now. The saber is very sharp. It lives by my bed. I imagine an intruder would not want to see me coming at them with that. Story 130. I have 2 swords. Long swords really just for costume, but they are sharp and pointy. One Viking longsword, not sharp but pointy. One two-hander curved fantasy sword, not sharp but it does not need to be, and one axe. All of these were purchased either for live-action role-playing or for costuming for stage. They are real in the sense that they are metal, can be sharpened, and will stand up to a hit or two. I keep them in the closet. Story 131. I probably still have some old ceremonial sabers from my grandfather, who was an officer in the military 70 to 80 years ago. Not exactly the mall ninja gear other people seem to think of. Story 132. I have one tiny attic bought years ago. I forgot about it until I read this. One of these days, I need to clean it out and get rid of the junk up there. Story 133. I have machetes of all sizes hidden in every room of my house because why not? Edit. I just realized what subreddit I am in, and I refuse to delete it. Story 134. Strider's Ranger Sword. One official and damaged. One knockoff and intact. Then Aragorn's knife, which he receives at Lothlorien. Official. I have no desire to keep them. I got them 20 years ago. They serve as a reminder that I once thought owning a sword would be cool. There is nothing to do with them. If you swing them indoors, you risk damaging your drywall or floor. If you take them outside and swing them around, you will get bored in 2 minutes if you don't hit yourself first. Oh well, Chekhov's swords. They are bound to come in handy one day. Story 135. I have my non-commissioned officer sword from my Marine Corps service. I am definitely not going to admit to owning and practicing with a katana, though. Definitely not. Women just like my forearms for other reasons. Story 136. I have a poorly made sword from Pakistan that looks like a saber. I bought it at a Renaissance fair more than 20 years ago. It is stored in the garage. Story 137. I have an arming sword that I bought with my coronavirus disease 2019 relief check because I wanted a sword when I was a little kid and never got one. It was definitely an impulse buy that has not really paid dividends, but sometimes I swing it around and feel cool. I imagine that a naked man screaming and charging at you with an actual sword would make for pretty decent home defense. Story 138. I have a workout sword in the shape of the Thundercat sword. My cousin gave all his groomsmen these a few years ago. Story 139. Story time. Short one though. When I was a kid, I had always wanted a sword. When I was 16, I got my first job. At the end of that summer, I looked for boots I could afford and wear, and a friend recommended jungle boots from the Army-Navy surplus store. I found the boots, loved them, especially for $35, and bought them. While at the checkout, I noticed they had a chikudo, or ninjato, a straight katana, hanging up behind the register area. I gave in to my inner child, bought it for $60, and kept it in my trunk for years. It actually came in quite handy to chase bad guys away when in the rougher sections of town. I still have it. I never sharpened it, but it still has a tiny edge, enough so that I won't let my son touch it. Story 140. Well, there is the Narsil replica on the wall. As others have pointed out, a bastard sword in enclosed spaces is not the best option. Story 141. I have several comic books where the main character wields a sword called Blade of the Immortal. Does that count? Story 142. I used to live in South Korea, and while I was there I picked up a wando. It is single-edged, about 2.5 feet long, and very gently curved. Story 143. Always packing the sword, yes sir. I would like to believe it is a weapon of mass destruction. As I get older, however, I find myself forced to consider that it is not more often than not. Story 144. I bought a cheap samurai sword as part of a costume once. It is sharp. I have not taken it out of the box since. It could be a rusted ruin now for all I know. I received a wooden practice sword, a metal practice sword that is not sharp, and another sharp sword from a friend who died. Now I have 2 sharp swords. Story 145. A machete hidden in a spot only my wife and I know, a katana that I have not seen in about 2 years. I think I know where it is. A collection of knives my wife has taken for crafting. I am a nerd, but not a blade nerd. I just had many blade nerds as friends. About 5 of them went into the sword business, so I received many hand-me-downs and freebies. Story 146. My wife and I are rocking some lightsabers we made from duct tape and broom handles. Every May the 4th, we dress up and have a duel. Story 147. I have about 10 swords. They are mostly American Civil War swords, some World War I Canadian swords, and some dress parade swords. Story 148. I bought a katana on Amazon when I was 14, back when you could buy anything online and no one checked identification. Story 149. 1 long sword, Endural, Lord of the Rings. 2 arming swords, one of Bavarian design and the other possibly English or Saxon. 1 non-commissioned officer sword, United States Marine Corps. That was a gift and not regulation, so I could not wear it. I also have a copy of Sting, but that is a dagger. Story 150. I have about 12 swords. Mostly cheap stainless steel ones from Bud K and other similar sites. A couple of Gladius-style short swords made with relatively nice high-carbon steel from Combat Commander. Surprisingly good considering the most expensive was about $50. A couple of nicer ones, including a katana, that is not really a katana because it is straight and double-edged, but it has a beautiful dark red pattern-welded fake Damascus design. I get more use out of my axe collection and my knives. Story 151. I currently have 3 swords. A shurnai, a Japanese bamboo sword, from my kendo days, which I am still maintaining. A Yasuo katana, unsharpened, which I got for free because I won a contest after purchasing a Zabuza sword, also unsharpened. I also had a Bakudo but donated it to our dojo after I left. In addition, I have knives of different kinds hidden all around the house. The Zabuza sword is 3.5 feet tall and 5 inches wide. It is a small version from the Naruto anime but very heavy, possibly classified as a 2-handed small broadsword. I also have a 4th sword. My grandfather gave this to my mother, who then gave it to me. It is a double-edged wooden sword without a hilt, and the edges are somewhat sharp. Story 152. I own a katana and 2 naginatas, all 3 fully functional and sharpened. I practice kabuto. They are stored in a locked closet in my room and sheathed with a protective cover. Story 153. I have this saber and case that was a gift to me after I graduated from a military academy and was commissioned as an officer. It is absolutely not sharp nor sturdy. I am positive it would break apart if I tried defending myself with it, but it makes a nice display piece. Story 154. My brother gave my son a Legend of Zelda Master Sword, a real one that could be used as a weapon. It is still in my house because he does not have anywhere to put it yet. Story 155. I was at a friend's home and he had a sword. He warned me that it was very sharp. Being pretty drunk, I tapped it against my arm for some reason. It was extremely sharp and cut a very deep wound in my arm. We had to stitch it up using a fish hook and fishing line. I have a noticeable scar now. Good times. Story 156. I have a medieval-looking long sword reportedly made from a leaf spring of a World War II Jeep left in the Philippines. I got it when I was in college from the son of a Marine who had been stationed there. He needed $20 and I liked the sword. Story 157. I have Bill's katana from Kill Bill, a functional gear sword from Attack on Titan, both versions of the grass cutter from Naruto, two dragon-themed katanas, matching wakizashi and tanto for one of them, a Templar short sword, a rapier, and two Baraka-style arm blades. Story 158. We have two items hidden in the garage that we inherited. I have no idea what they are, but we do not want our two boys fighting with them. Story 159. I have multiple weapons. I practice historical European martial arts and Western martial arts and currently have a CG Gothic longsword and Encipher Messer sitting at my door. A historical fencing armory rapier and dagger are also in my car, alongside a synthetic Dane axe and Viking sword. My round shield is in the shed. I also have a CG King in production that should be here soon. I use them all the time and love it. Story 160. I used to have two samurai swords before my house was robbed. One was the bamboo katana from Gujai.com, and the other was a World War II war relic my grandpa bought from a local hoodlum for a quarter in the 1950s. It was in World War II furniture but had a real handmade antique samurai blade housed in it, which was not too uncommon at the time. I never learned much about it. This was around the year 2000, and I was not proficient with internet research at the time. Story 161. Between blunts, sharps, and decorative swords, I have the following: 2 great swords, 4 long swords, 1 saber, 1 falchion, 3 arming swords, 1 Tai Chi Jin, 1 katana, 2 movie replicas, 5 synthetic training swords of various types. Story 162. I have a machete to cut branches or someone's arm if they break in, but that is just the Dominican in me, I guess. Story 163. Yes, 2 machetes and 1 inexpensive mall store katana that someone gave me. The 2 machetes are legitimate and functional. One is Ebola, and the other is modeled after a gladius. Story 164. I have a 6-foot-long replica of Tensa Zangetsu from Bleach. It was my best friend's, and I got it when he died. It is now hanging on the wall of my game room along with Ichigo's hollow mask. Story 165. Oh boy, I have 3 swords made by Angus Trim. 1. Type XA with custom hilt and scabbard by Christian Fletcher. Bought secondhand and customized to my design. Type XVIA war sword. Bought directly from Gus. Type XIA with custom hilt but no scabbard by Christian Fletcher. Secondhand purchase on the Old Sword Forum International Classifieds. I like longhand and half swords. I also have a Palchin katana and a couple of European-style wall hangers. They have no distal taper and were probably made from truck springs, but at least they are not stainless steel. One of them is a relic of Excalibur from the movie of the same name. I bought those back in the 1990s when I knew I loved swords but did not know much about them. Sword Forum International and My Armory were very helpful to learn and interact with smiths like Tinker and Trim back in the day. I also have a lovely Norse spear made by Arms and Armor. It is not a sword but still awesome. I have mostly switched my interest from expensive cold-forged swords to original comic book art and have not bought a sword in a while. However, I have been very tempted by a few from Valiant Armory, Albion, or getting a custom one by someone like John Lundermo. Story 166. I have many firearms, but my favorite blade is the kukri. I am not Indian, but they created a blade that is perfect for me. It is right next to me with a 9mm pistol loaded with hollow point ammunition. Story 167. 4 or 5, depending on where you draw the line for a sword. I have a couple of Night Collection wall hangers, an arming sword and a bastard sword. I picked up at a Renaissance fair, a $20 cane sword with no edge but a sharp point, a surprisingly sharp Kizlyar Shashka I got from the pawn shop for about $40, and an unidentified Vietnam-era bayonet that I have been meaning to clean up and get appraised. I also made myself a nice little handle for the bayonet so I can fix it into a sort of IKA in an emergency. While I have scrubbed and oiled it thoroughly, there is still a noticeable amount of crust on the blade. If I go down to an invader, whatever unholy jungle rot still resides there is probably taking them down with me. Story 168. I have one inexpensive mall ninja sword that I bought from an online retailer when I was 16. It is cheap and poorly made but sharp enough to be functional. It sits collecting dust in a corner. I have 2 machetes. One I bought when I was 14 from an army surplus store. The other was a gift from my dad. I use both for various tasks in the yard. I also have two tomahawks, which I enjoy using for camping. Story 169. I have Urahara's sword from Bleach because I wanted to buy a sword, and the inexpensive anime wall hangers were the only ones I could afford. Story 170. Riddick's knives. Several swords from the Lord of the Rings. A broadsword, scimitar, 5 katanas, blade sword from the movie Blade, a rapier, many more, but my wife won't let me hang them in the house. Story 171. This has shown that many people are strangely prepared for zombies beyond just movies with guns. Story 172. Yes, I have a model 1902 cavalry saber that was given to me as a gift by a mentor of mine, a retired United States Army officer. It was purchased and forged new for me. It was awarded to me when I graduated and was commissioned as an officer into the United States Air Force after officer training school. While it is ceremonial, it is perfectly capable of combat. Story 173. My grandmother has a large katana. She practiced kendo when she was younger and keeps her sword in her study. Story 174. I have a Chris. Mine is Malaysian, possesses an essence. We chose each other when I first handled it. If I am attacked, my Chris will do supernatural things to protect me. Story 175. I am too young to be able to buy it, but it is one of my goals in life. Ideally, I want to have a katana and a European medieval sword. I love both of these and cannot possibly choose just one. Story 176. I have a whole collection. I will put them up once the children become teenagers. Cannot wait. Edit, my apologies. I did not realize it was the Ask Men subreddit. Story 177. I have a few swords. The sharpest one is a Chinese design sword I bought on Amazon for a few $100s. I also have a Renaissance fair blunted sword that looks more European with copper accents. Additionally, I have a lightsaber, a bamboo practice sword, and some foam anime swords. Story 178. I have several practice sparring swords but no real ones yet. I refuse to buy the swords from Japanese animation, video games, or internet subcultures. Only historical swords for me. Story 179. Never owned a sword. I did own a batleth once. To this day, I have no idea where it is. I remember wrapping it up in a blanket when I moved, but I don't know where it ended up. I had some stuff at my brother's house at one point, but we never found a batleth. Anyway, success. Story 180. I have a cookery machete that I used to keep next to my bed before I was old enough to own a firearm. I have had it since I was 13. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.